Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 14. Oh my God, 14. I can't believe I'm already there of season 5 of Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I'm the founder, producer, and host for the series. Y'all, it is 12:09. Y'all know that I have gotten into the habit of starting really late because I really like to bond with my guests beforehand. And I lose track of time because of making that connection. So I'm here. This is going to be an amazing conversation. Trust that. Today, I am beyond excited to welcome to Black Writers Read, one of our biggest supporters. I met today's guest some time ago on social media, and he's a huge champion of literature. He posts regularly about what he's reading and also has shared a lot about Black Writers Read with others. It means so much to have him on today to talk about his debut novel. So let's go ahead and get started. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted over 70 authors representing 10 plus genres from 5 countries and 23 states. Our platform includes the live stream interviews, audio podcasts, book clubs, and curriculum development assistance. Find us online at blackwritersread.com. Today, we welcome Justin Haynes. Justin Haynes is a fiction writer originally from the Caribbean. His work has been supported by various residencies and fellowships, including from the Fine Arts Work Center, which is in Provincetown, and the 10 House Summer Workshop. His writing has been published in various literary magazines and journals, including Caribbean Quarterly and SX Salon Small X Project. Haynes lives in Atlanta and teaches English and writing and creative writing for Oglethorpe University. Today's conversation will center around his debut novel, Ibis. A bold, witty, magical new voice in fiction, Justin Haynes weaves a cross-generational Caribbean story of migration, superstition, and a search for family in this book. There is bad luck in New Felicity. The people of the small coastal village have taken on Milagros, an 11-year-old Venezuelan refugee, just as Trinidad's government has begun cracking down on undocumented migrants. And now an American journalist has come to town asking questions. New Felicity, superstitious fishermen fear the worst, certain they've brought bad luck on the village by killing a local witch who had herself murdered 2 villagers the year before. The town has been plagued since her death by alarming visits from her supernatural mother, as well as by a mysterious profusion of scarlet ibis birds. Now, skittish that the reporter's story will bring down the wrath of the Ministry of National Security, the fishermen take things into their own hands. From there, we go backward and forward in time, from the town's early days when it was the site of a sugar plantation to Milagros' adulthood as she searches for her mother across the Americas. In between, through the voices of a chorus of narrators, we glimpse moments from various villagers' lives, each one setting into motion events that will reverberate outwards across the novel and shape Milagros' faith. I actually wanted to share, because this book already has gotten some very high praise, I wanted to share 2 quotes from 2 authors on this text. This is from Jenny O'Phil, author of Weather. With kinetic, absorbing language and a powerful sense of voice, Ibis meditates on the bond between mothers and daughters, both highlighting the migrant crisis that troubles the contemporary world and offering a moving exploration of how to square where we come from with who we become. This brilliant, shape-shifting novel, actually, I think I may have messed up some verbiage here. Her quote starts here. This brilliant, shape-shifting novel teems with charms and curses, stunning disasters, and startling moments of grace. Haynes is a thrillingly original writer who writes about the thin veil between worlds with spectacular range and scope. And then the last praise I would like to share is from Jericho Brown, MacArthur Fellow, and prize-winning author of The Tradition. Justin Haynes provides himself an absolute alchemist of fiction. Let me go back. I'm messing up today. Justin Haynes proves himself an absolute alchemist of fiction. This is a stunning debut, as witty as it is rapturous. Published by the Overlook Press, Ibis is scheduled for release on February 11th, 2025. It is currently available for pre-order wherever you purchase your books. And wherever you purchase your books, please make sure that you start looking at local bookstores and independent sellers first. To learn more about Justin and his work, please visit his website at justinhayneswriter.com. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format. Justin will read an excerpt from his work, then we'll chat. If time remains at the end of the conversation, we'll open it up to question and answer with those of you who are joining us today. We typically have viewers joining us from YouTube and Facebook. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and either pose them to our guests following our conversation or insert them during an appropriate time within our chat. I'd now like to officially welcome Justin Haynes to the virtual stage. Welcome.
Hey, Nicole, thank you for such a gracious introduction, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. I think I stumbled a lot because I was just like, I've read, the description of the book and the excerpt that you sent me, but hearing it aloud, I'm like, whoa, this is a powerful book. And it comes at such a pivotal time. We all know what moment is happening in the US. I don't have to name it. I don't want to name it and give it power. So I cannot state how much I appreciate you writing this book and just the timing of the publication. So thank you.
Okay. So just to preface before I read this, that all of the chapters relate to birds in some way. So this chapter is called A Handwritten Journal in which fireflies and frigate birds portend rough seas. And this is written, the second part of it, it's written from the perspective of our main character's mom. So this is Gracia, who is Milagros' mom. The broker reminds me of an animal that I can't quite name, something slithery. He tells me to meet him here. Here, I ask, in the cemetery? Right here in the cemetery. How can this be a good sign? I pull Milagros tight against me. Her head reaches just above my stomach. We've heard stories. Marisol and her daughters were to sail to Curacao. They were never heard from again after the boat launched. Marisol's mother still texts her daughter's phone number. Pobrecito. To me, that's like sticking your head into a bucket of water to hold a conversation. There are worse signs. Will it be safe? I ask the broker. His face is in eels. Claro, he says, but just in case, you know how to swim, right? He sees my face. A joke, he says. Are you in or are you out? In, without hesitation. He taps something on his phone's face, sending info about 2 more passengers, he says. You and your pretty daughter, Hermosa. I hold Milagros tighter against me. How will we get there, I ask. You're all set, he says. Your reservation is booked. How long will the trip take? He shrugs and slips his phone into his back pocket. A few hours. Where on the island are we going to land? Will we be safe? You'll sail through the devil's mouth, he says. He raises fingers. In 2 days, meet me here. That eel's smile. The thought of a dragon's mouth, it makes me think of a squirming snake in a big mud puddle. A snake being all an eel really is. I hand over his payment. I tell him I want to see Fortunato before the trip. He lifts his eyebrows. Wants to know how I know this name, but he won't say the name aloud. He says he will see if an audience will be granted. You hear these stories. Ours isn't that bad, Milagros isn't mine. The crossing. Really, it isn't. Getting here. The boat is meant for 10 people. It ends up tuna can tight with 20 or 30 of us. We ride low in the water. The boat smells of gasoline, rotting wood, and mildew. Keep expecting to hear a cracking sound and see a leak shoot up like in the cartoons. The boat comes dangerously close to sinking beneath the waterline and taking on water. I hold Milagros tight, mostly women and children on the boat. Only women and children on the boat. Other than gasoline, rotting wood, and mildew, there's the smell of bodies. Also Lysol and vomit and reckless hope. No one wears life vests except Milagros. Where are all the men? I'm ashamed to think it, but if we sink, I'm glad that Milagros is with me. We see the island in the distance, bit by bit. It draws closer and everyone's hope escalates. The beach is beautiful even at night, which makes me uneasy. Fireflies light up over the water. They seem pinned to the air, unmoving, hung like ornaments. These living lights mesmerize the children, but they are children. Then birds appear to eat the fireflies, swoop down out of the air, and the lights just wink out one by one, nature feeding. It's the middle of the night. No one seems to notice the lights winking out. I squeeze my sun quartz pendant tightly, and I hug Milagros tighter. You hear these stories, they're truly bad, awful. Makes you wonder how people continue to wrap their arms around religion. People like me. Ours isn't so bad, our story, how we came to the island, it really isn't. You hear the boat sinking stories and the soul lost stories, and your heart splinters and falls apart, but ours is okay. I used to live on this island once, a long time ago. I was a different person, full of light. The boat that Milagros and I get on is tighter than an oyster's lips. My brother Manuel used to fish. He stank all the time of fish skins and fish guts and fish gills. I wonder where he is, if he's still on this island. The captain of the boat looks jumpy. His eyes won't stop moving. There's a medical condition for it, nystagmus. My friend Carmen, nurse, once told me about it. If the broker had an eel's face, this one has the face of a frog. Marisol says frogs in Puerto Rico are called coqui. And they talk more than chickens. The coqui wouldn't shut up the entire time I was there, she'd said, which was back when people could take vacations because they had a little money. Milagros' father wanted me to give birth to Milagros on the island so he could care for her. But then he disappeared and his big shot son turned his back on me. Who knew I'd regret that Milagros wasn't born on an island? Who knew that I would, in fact, meet with a gangster? He looked me over with his dead eyes and said that he would hold Milagros' letter for me. I didn't know if I believed him. I wanted to be sure. It felt like I was leaving breadcrumbs for her in case I would somehow get separated from her, even though I didn't want to tempt fate, because fate always takes things too far. Being separated from her might become never seeing her again. Venezuela used to be rich. The captain isn't afraid of our Coast Guard. He's afraid of the island's Coast Guard. Cold comfort. But it means that he's sure this old tub will make it that far. It's done it before. A confident vessel, reliable. He's done this before. He's done this in his sleep. Beyond a frog, his face looks like a crumpled love note, pulled from a pocket and spread flat. He says half our fee will be to pay off the Coast Guard if we're stopped. No one asks if the deposit will be returned if no payoff is necessary. Where are all the men on this trip? You hear all these stories, and here's one more. The children finally feel everyone's fear, especially the 3- and 4-year-olds. They cling to their mother's waists and legs, barnacles. I cling to Milagros. The birthright of every child born in our village was asthma. Every other child had been born with it, along with crippled hope and faulty futures. You can tell which children on the boat are from our town by the coughs. They own a sound, a hollowness in their chests. The space hope leaves behind when it evaporates. Milagros never developed asthma, and I knew that she wouldn't from the moment she was born, hence her name. Everyone wanted to know my secret. Did I name her from seeing a mystical sign? Did I feed her liver oil from fishes? I laughed. I grasped my sun quartz. Who could afford oil from a fish's liver? I shrugged. Now none of the other children's parents can find inhalers or medicine on the mainland, not even a vitamin. They're staying behind as a flip of death's coin, either poor nutrition or poor pockets. Think about the jobs that I will take on the island, cooking and cleaning, tending bars. I used to be a butcher a long time ago on this island. My English is still good. I once loved a man there, Milagros' father. You hear stories. You hear stories about some of the women who head to the island and the jobs they end up with, awful jobs, massage parlors, strip clubs. Some accept it without pushback, do it willingly. They send back the money they make, send back medication. I'm not sure I have the guts for that. Word is that there's enough women desperate enough for that other kind of work, that the men don't have to pressure women into doing it, that being poor and hungry makes them willing participants, that they quickly disavow any pride and accept this new reality. The only difference here is that the money that they earn can purchase medicine, tampons, a new pair of shoes. We make it safely to the island, but there are some close calls, high waves lifting the boat off the ocean's carpet. Children and women heaving what little is inside their tummies over the side of the boat. The sounds, the smells. We land on a beautiful beach. Well, the jetty of the beautiful beach, which makes me uneasy. Landing on rocks or on ugly sand or near an oil refinery would have made it feel like a debt had been paid, an offering to the gods of spite. Yesterday, I dragged Milagros with me to the cemetery to ask the thugs for protection. After I visited Fortunato and left a letter for him to hold, a copy to Carmen, there were fireflies, lightning bugs, eaten up, plunging us back into darkness. All the fireflies have disappeared. A man in a tight black shirt and shaved head receives us right there on the jetty, him and his armed goons. He's a scar through an eyebrow, he's going bald. They line us up when we depart the boat. 2 lines, they confiscate all our phones. It's clear what they're up to. The woman in one line of beauty is her own firm bodies. I watch one of the goons work his way down the line, like he's separating the ripe produce from the green, the wheat from the chaff. You, over here, he points. You, over there. The women hold their children tightly and do as they are told. Once or twice, they separate women from older daughters, 12 or 13 years old. None lift their chins. A few weep. And look at the old tug captain's frog face. He's been paid for this as well. His eyes still jump. I am not surprised. There were no men among us. From the minute that we climbed on this boat, it felt like we were all made to sleep, only to awaken to find marionette strings attached to all our limbs. The goon approaches me and Milagros. Not Milagros, I think. Please, not Milagros. The man with the shaved head stoops before us. My, you're pretty, says the man with the shaved head. He's dropped his haunches. His face isn't an eel's or frog's. There's no animal that compares. He's his own breed. I hold Milagros tight. He looks right into the eyes. I've been here 2 weeks and already I'm ready to kill. They keep me in a room. They keep Milagros away from me. I've hidden my pendant, a gift from Milagros' father. The Huevon keeps Milagros from me, and this keeps me on a leash. Don't worry, the man with the shaved head promises me. She's too young. Her chest are just plums, he says. Days later, he sits at a chair in the corner of the room. He crosses his legs. He says that he wouldn't lie to me. He says he'll be completely honest. He says that he has a client who likes that kind of thing. Jovencita, he says. He says that he will keep Milagros safe for him until the client decides if she's his type. She may not be, he says. There's a chance. He says the client's a big shot on the island, a government minister, if I can believe it. High up, responsible for latching the gate and keeping people like me out. He can't get away right now. There's always so much to do. I leap for his eyes. One of his goons knocks me down. Tigre, tigre, he laughs, crosses his legs. The men come and I kill them all, I kill them all, I kill them all. In my head, I kill them all, every last one of them. They come at night. As a collective, drunk from some fishing village, they smell like my brother, fish guts and fish skin and fish heads, rotting. All of them, the boy too. They bring him to make him a man, to straighten him out. You can see he doesn't look well, some vitamin deficiency. Carmen would know the name. He didn't want to be there at first, but he became just like them in the end, all of them. Rough. I kill him quickly. He's just a boy after all. A quick death is a mercy. Think of Manuel, of Milagros, the dreams we harbor. The one with the sharp shirts and spiced cologne I kill the slowest. He returns the most, without the others. He's never embarrassed to be here. He wears an earring. His eyelashes should be on a woman. Later he comes in hobbling with a cane, and I think, good, you're in pain too. He whispers terrible things in my ears, things that he knows will keep me compliant, that Mila is here in the house, that he's seen her many times, and if I'm good, if I behave, that I can see her soon. I know that he's lying, but I can't know for sure. They said she was somewhere safe for now, but what if she's in another room with someone doing terrible things to her? With this horrible man doing terrible things to her. If I knew for sure that she was in this house, I would have his eyes as ice cubes in the glass of water that I'm allowed every few hours. But if I tried to escape and search for her, I know my punishment will be terrible. In this house, you can smell oranges, but the windows are boarded up. And the other one shows up, the one with the floating eye, Mickey. He gets a name because I remember him from when he was a teenager. I remember his father, Sonny. Ask after Sonny's health. Sonny's passed, he says. I offer my sympathies. He does nothing when he visits except talk of freeing me. He sneaks in food. He has a plan. We all have a plan, I tell him. He used to work for Milagros' father, him and Sonny. No one in the village knew. Sonny helped Hubert plant the trees. Mickey tells me he can get Milagros out even if he has to sell his house to raise the money. Doesn't tell me how he knows about her. Doesn't tell me the truth or how he'll do it. Because who sells their house to help a stranger? I'm suspicious. Take me as well, I say. He shakes his head. He's sorry. They keep all the children together. It will be easier. Carmen shows up to see us off, she and Daniela. Our going away gift is a life jacket. She apologizes. I can only get one, she says. I'm grateful. Pull it on Milagros. I tell Daniela to be good. Hug her tight. Take care of your mommy. When I see that there are no life jackets for anyone else, I feel bad, strapping the lone one onto Milagros. But no one minds. Everyone's snapping pictures with their phones like we're boarding a plane for a European vacation, like we're being invited to our island destination. They send the pictures to people, fingers flamenco dancing on phone screens. Or maybe they're leaving breadcrumbs. The boat should hold only 10 people. Even I can see this. I hold Milagros tight, touch the sun quartz for luck. We'll never see this place again, our homeland. I'm sure of it.
Thank you. And especially thank you so much for reading that particular excerpt, because I think it will help. It helps really frame our conversation today. So the first question that I have for you, Justin, is I would love to hear the origin story of Ibis. Why this title and why the story right now?
Right. So the thing that writers can never know is when their stories are going to be sort of important when they're released, because the publishing game in traditional publishing takes so long. So this book was picked up by Overlook maybe a couple of years ago, and and it's just being published now in February. So when I started writing the book, I think it was back in 2018, and I'd been back in Trinidad visiting family, and back then the president of Venezuela was the president then as well. He's pretty much an autocrat, and he recently won another election back in July, and the opposition said that he hasn't really won it, that he sort of stole the election. Anyway, back then Trinidad was getting a lot of Venezuelan refugees coming across, and I wasn't reading a lot of novels at that point. I just kept reading the newspapers because I was just astounded by the stories that were coming out. There were always the stories about women mostly being found, being held in these terrible situations. And there was one story about women who were found in a house, and the house had been kind of disguised out front to make it look like a police station. So I was just, my mind was blown by this sort of deceit that had been used. And about a week later, there was a story about maybe 30 women had been found in a house, and they were this range of ages. They were very sort of barely teenagers to women in their 30s, and it may have been like 30 or 40 of them. And I just, every so often the police perform these raids, and they, someone tips them off and they find them. But it seems, no matter how many they find, there's that many more who are not found and who are being made to live in slave-like conditions. And I didn't feel like it was my job to write the story necessarily, but I couldn't not write it, if that makes sense. Yes. So I just started writing, and I just started writing from the perspective of a woman who'd been there in the situation. And I tried to, I could not think of the terrible things that were happening. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Ibis's protagonist, Milagros. I'm going to rewind. Before I ask this question, I absolutely love the stories from the perspective of young people. I try to teach that in a lot of the classes that I teach, particularly a lot of my 101 and 102 English composition courses. And the reason why I like to teach those is because many people don't believe that young folks understand the worlds around them, and they do. And then also they also say young people don't really have a voice. Young people don't know themselves, and I'm like, oh, you'll be surprised. Right. And I won't take I won't take credit for this, but I was watching something yesterday. It was a crime show actually, and it was a young person talking about an experience watching something very traumatic happen. And then the narrator said something to the effect of, you will be surprised how observant young people are. especially since a lot of their vantage point is so unfiltered.
Right.
I live near a train track, so you'll probably hear the train in a second.
There it is.
Yep. It makes an appearance every Black Writers Read because I think we get a train like every 10 or 20 minutes. And young people, because I also remember like my own experience as a young person, like just being very observant. I'm a sponge, I'm taking in so much. So I really appreciate that the perspective of the story is told from a young person's vantage point. So the question: Ibis's protagonist, Milagros, is an 11-year-old Venezuelan refugee. Can you share with us some insight on her? And then who is she and why was it important for you to center Ibis from the perspective of a young person?
A big part of it is exactly what you said. Young people are so curious. The world remains so new to them, and they're almost always in a situation that they haven't quite experienced before, especially if they're watching their parents and how their parents interact with other people. If it's a new person in their surroundings, their parents are not always the same as they are with the children, for example. So I wanted Milagros to be incredibly curious. And at the same time, this is a new situation for her. She's brought to an island. She doesn't really speak the language. Um, and and she doesn't speak very much, but she's always trying to take in what's happening around her. And she's she's based on something that Toni Morrison has said. And if you go online, the interview is probably still there. And she's speaking about Piccola from The Bluest Eye. And she says, up to this point in literary history, little Black girls have not featured in books unless they're furniture, unless they're a figure of fun, or they're not given any kind of agency. And she said, I just wanted to tell the story of a little Black girl who, had lived a very difficult life. And I'm just paraphrasing here. And that always just kind of stuck with me. That I think the most vulnerable people obviously are children, but I think little Black girls in particular, and especially in the Western Hemisphere, and this is my personal experience, they get the worst of it, and then they grow up to be Black women, and they still get the worst of it. So I wanted to kind of pay homage to what Ms. Morrison had said in talking about the hurt that little Black girls experience.
Yeah, wow. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm gonna save my because there's just so rich, and thank you for quoting Toni Morrison, such an important ancestor. Um, Ibis is told from the perspective of multiple narrators, including Milagros' mother, Garcia. Can you talk about using the distinct voices to carry the story, and why first-person narrative is key to exploring the journeys that your characters take?
Yeah. So for the first part of it, I use multiple voices because not everyone has good intentions in the book. And as writers often do, you try to write from different perspectives. I try to write this from a third person, sort of distance perspective, where we just kind of see every character's experience. I try to write third close, where we try to get into the thoughts of a single character within a chapter. It's really hard for me to stop from head hopping. And what I eventually settled on is the most intimate of any type of narrative is that first person, where you can see the unvarnished and unfiltered thoughts of the people. And there's one perspective that's written from someone who is essentially, owns bodies, owns people. And the thing you always want to be wary of in writing, I think, is if you're writing an antagonist or someone who doesn't have good intentions, is to make them seem like they're one-dimensional. Because, and I don't know this for sure, but I think a lot of people who do bad things do it out of a sense of self-interest. Their morality is kind of skewed, but it's skewed into thinking they just want the best for themselves. So I kind of wrote it thinking a lot of these people in the story are not very good people, but trying to understand what it would be like for a person who doesn't see what they're doing as being particularly bad, but just out of a sense of radical self-interest, of objective self-interest, and what that would look like if they all got something to say, if they were all provided with a voice.
Mm. You provided a lot of this when you introed what you were going to read. And then also, too, I love the excerpt that you chose for this particular reason. So, place is a central theme in Ibis. Can you talk about how this theme emerges in the text and how it frames the experiences of migrants within the Caribbean and South America? And I did not realize that the situation was as recent as 2018. What is the mission of IBIS, especially given how the text frames the unique experiences of the migrant crisis in this region of the globe?
Right. So this is probably too difficult of a question to answer in a few pithy phrases. I will say that geographically, Trinidad and Venezuela are maybe 5 or 7 miles apart at the closest points. On clear days, you can see Venezuela from Trinidad. At the same time, it takes 5 or 6 hours, I think, by boat is what I've read, just to get from one point to the other, just 5 or 6 miles, just because of the currents and you want to travel in sort of the safest lanes. I think is a big part of it. But geographically, they're very similar, and one of Trinidad's major sources of economy is oil beds that they share with Venezuela. And because so many sanctions have been put against Venezuela because of who's the president at the time, who's the president then and the president now, Venezuela actually has the sort of richest reserves of oil in the world. But because of all the sanctions that have been put on them, they pretty much can't sell it to anyone. And the end result of that is extreme poverty for a lot of the people. This trickles down. And I kind of wanted to, I actually was not able to travel to Venezuela for this. And that was the line I felt like I had to walk the most. Is I have a couple of chapters where I have characters in Venezuela. And I wanted to be very careful not to make it seem like a tourist's eyes perspective of someone who hadn't been there. So I did a lot of research, and I hope I did it justice. But to get back to your sort of major question, is I wanted the cultures to seem similar in certain perspectives, but obviously different. Obviously different because everyone's upbringing is going to be completely different. But I wanted an environment that was on the Caribbean side of it, that was a little unforgiving, but at the same time, ultimately, there are people who hope to do good and hope to do well by Milagros, because she's such a pure figure and someone who is just sort of experiencing the world for the first time.
Ibis is told from the perspective of the mother-daughter relationship, which I appreciate on so many levels. How does this specific style choice and device operate within the text, and why was it important to you, which you kind of alluded to it a little bit in your description earlier, and why was it important to you to tell the story from this perspective?
Right. So the thing I was trying to get at with Milagros is this want of a person to be with a person who is responsible for shaping her entire life up to that point, who gets separated from her. And she spends most of her time growing up trying to remember who this person was and having these memories kind of fade over time. So what eventually happens toward the second half of the book is we see it from Milagros' perspective, and she's an adult, and she has this vision of her mother. It's very sort of clear. It's not a dream per se. It's just sort of a very clear vision of when she was young and she was with her mom, and she makes it her mission to reconnect with her mom. She gets the sense that her mom is still alive and somewhere. She's kind of half-heartedly over the years trying to find her. So I think what I wanted to kind of get at with that relationship is how can the desire for a child, a young woman and a young girl, want to be with her mother, even though she's been separated from her? And my training, I think, in grad studies was in 19th century African American stories, and 20th century novels and literature. So that's always at the back of my mind, of separating daughters from their mothers, and And what does that wound look like? How is that trauma? Can that trauma be addressed in any way? It can never be healed, we know that, but can it be addressed in trying to make a reconnection at some point and in some way?
Nice. Prior to having our guests on Black Writers Read, we ask each of them why they write. Here's what you offered. More and more, I have been writing to find a sense of peace. The closer that I get to book publication, the more things seem to devolve into chaos, both with regard to the book and the surrounding world. Writing allows me to momentarily close the door to some of that chaos and settle my mind. To be a writer during this time is to understand that one's work will necessarily have a political strain. Whether we like it or not, our writing is a reflection of the world around us. No matter how much we try to caulk the cracks, elements of society will seep in, and this period of time is really setting itself up to be a febrile and tumultuous. Writers can't afford to turn away. This is one of the reasons why I want to start another podcast. Ibis seeks to call attention to the refugee crisis that seems to be just beyond our peripheral vision. In the US, there is awareness of the treatment of migrants on the border and more recently in Ohio. But people in dire straits aren't just trying to get to the US or to European countries. Ibis wants to magnify the emergency a little further afield, specifically in South America and the Caribbean. So you are the third or fourth Caribbean writer that I've had on. As a Caribbean writer, what are some advantages and challenges of using fiction as your main literary vehicle? What does fiction allow for you that other genres like creative nonfiction, poetry, history, or biography do not when it comes to constructing the narrative, in particular for Ibis?
Yeah. So I think for me, I can never get enough of the news, and that is both a gift and a curse. I always want to know what's going on in the world, and sometimes I just feel like I really wish I could just unplug and just disconnect and not know what is going on. But I feel like as a citizen of the world, you have to be aware of injustice. You have to be aware of people who have things, in a terrible situation. I have a couple of friends out in Los Angeles right now, and I feel terrible. I want to reach out to them every day, but it seems my not being able to do anything makes me feel guilty. And I know I can write a check, I can send money, but that doesn't feel like enough. So to answer your question in terms of being a Caribbean writer, a lot of the stories that are happening there, this kind of trauma, it's not being told. Or if it is being told, it's kind of lower down on the rungs in terms of what people can deal with. People are dealing with what's happening in Palestine. A ceasefire was recently announced, and then we heard that 124 Palestinians were killed after the ceasefire was announced.
Yeah.
And I think people just get filled, their emotional sort of cistern gets filled, and they can't take it anymore. But people always love stories, and people always kind of want to be entertained. I mean, one of the reasons that I was kind of wary of getting onto social media was you hear all of these stories of people, doing odd things and that I was not interested in. But what I've found since I've signed on is that there's this great book reading community, and people are hungry for stories. And I think more so than poetry, in history to a certain level, I think history books probably outsell fiction by a lot. Romance is the most read genre in the world. People are invested in stories, and they kind of want to look away from the world around them and sort of be taken away from all of the horrible things that are happening to them. So I guess part of why I write is to sneak a little news into people's diets in a way that it's not so unvarnished, it's not so destructive, it's not so mind-numbing, that you can actually see characters, you can see people experiencing this, and sometimes there are triumphs and sometimes there are shortcomings, but you get to connect to those people. And part of the problem of hearing about these disasters, the natural disasters of the fires in Los Angeles, hearing all of these people who were killed in Palestine, is that you really get to know any of these people. It just becomes a number of people. It becomes this mass of people, and it's difficult. Sometimes you hear stories of one or two people, and they're heartbreaking, and you kind of turn away from it. So I think what fiction does, it provides a structure whereby, yes, difficult things may be happening, but it's not all difficult things all the time. There are moments of joy, there are moments of happiness. And I think the structure of that allows people, whether they're invested in knowing what the world is doing or not, it allows them to kind of learn those things through historical novels and not kind of want to put it aside and said, all right, this feels like a moral, this feels like a lesson, this feels like you're trying to get the news into me. So yeah, I think more so than maybe poetry or long form essays, because long form essays sometimes hews very closely to what you find in the newspaper. I think fiction allows that kind of ironic sort of distance from terrible stories, but at the same time allows you to get very close without feeling the feelings that you would feel about real people in terrible situations.
Yeah, this brings me to, because I'm in the process right now trying to figure out, and we have like a couple more questions, how to talk about an experience I recently had. So I recently went on vacation. My husband and I, we went to visit Civil War battlegrounds. He does living history and reenactments. And we went to 4 different museums at these battlegrounds. And what was it? All 4 had a film. We watched the film, and next we toured the battlegrounds. 3 of the films were very formulaic, documentary style, 30 minutes, boom, all this information. And I was like, but also too, I'm a storyteller. So I'm just sitting up here like, okay. And then there was one battleground, Manassas, that actually, they had their film told from the perspective of someone who was of a civilian who was killed that lived near the site. And it was 45 minutes. I was drawn in because they framed a plot, narrative, and all these other things. And then it made me want to dig more into what happened at that particular site. So I actually ended up spending more time at that particular site because of the entry point was an actual narrative rather than documentary. I know I love documentary, don't get me wrong, but for stories that are like this heavy, I need not necessarily fiction, but I need like a particular perspective so I can connect.
Yes.
And I believe, and I'm starting to, I think you and I talked a little bit about this. I'm starting to dabble into fiction a little bit because my writing vessels are poetry and playwriting. And I'm starting a little bit of, and this is why I'm exploring memoir, because of the power of what fiction can do. Also, fiction, I feel like, can imagine these worlds of possibilities, because for many of us of the African diaspora, we come from some heavy traditions and we come from some very heavy worlds. And so I feel like fiction allows for us to really dig deeper in terms of relationships, in terms of like people's purpose and all these things. So thank you for writing this particular story in fiction.
Can I just interject really quickly?
Yes, please do.
I used to live in Richmond, Virginia, and I drove out to Fredericksburg one time, and I went to a museum and watched one of the films that you're kind of describing. And like you said, it was just documentary style. And, we were close to Civil War battlegrounds, and I was so interested to hear about the history of it. And you're right, it just felt like I was, and like you said, documentaries are great, but I was just being given information. And it was 30 minutes of just information. And here was the battle line, and here was the general, and here were the troops. And you're right. When someone is honed in on, someone is focused on, that person's story is being told, you draw me in. I'm that much more connected to what you're telling me, and the details stick with me much longer.
Yeah, and I also too have, just because we were gone for a week, fond memories because we stayed in inns and bed and breakfasts in the region. And the innkeepers had such rich stories about like the area and the families that own the homes. And also there was one inn that we stayed at, the wife of the innkeeper couple, her grandfather served in the Civil War, and we had a chance. She recently acquired his journal, and we read his journal. So I was just like, yes, I was happy to have had that kind of dual experience, to really dig deep in terms of history, both from the perspective of the National Park Service, which I applaud them for the work that they do, and then also from the innkeepers in those regions. As an author and educator, actually, I'm gonna bookend it with this first. So, one of the things that I love that you do on social media, and I hope folks find you on social media, is you're a bookstagrammer. You are such an avid reader. I applaud and respect that hustle because, like, it feels like every day you've read a new book, and I'm like, dude, I can barely get through a book a month, and I'm like, you seem like you do a book a day. I'm like, oh my god. And I so appreciate that hustle, like how much you share your love of reading and really digging deep in terms of the author's perspective. So this is one of the reasons why I was like, I not only have to have him on Black Writers Read, but also too just to really get to know you. So as an author and educator, because you are a professor and a scholar, and bookstagrammer. What would you like for your legacy to be, and how do you want your work to inform and contribute to the literary canon?
So just to go back a little bit to what you were saying about being on Bookstagram, you know, I faced kind of a quandary because I had got on to Bookstagram just to talk about books, like you said, but at the same time I had a book coming out, and I said, you know, do I want to make a separate account just to talk about being a writer? And that felt disingenuous. That felt like I was kind of separating my personality and my character. So I said, no, I'll spend a lot more time talking about other people's books, and every now and again I'll just sort of say what's happening with my own book. And that has proven to be so vital for me getting closer to publication, because the thing that I don't know if a lot of writers understand unless they're on social media and talking to readers is exactly the wide perspective that readers have and how interested they are in various kinds of genres and different kinds of books. And you can kind of see in real time which books are successful, why people like them, why people dislike them. There are always going to be books with sort of big five publishers who get the most marketing and get the most eyeballs because of it. And some of them land and really resonate with readers. But then you find these books these little gems that haven't gotten a lot of eyes, that are independently published, that were self-published, and they are just beloved in the community of book readers. And that is so important to me. I don't want to say readers are better than writers, but yeah, I think they kind of are. Because not just because, you know, without readers there would be no audience, but I find readers infinitely more interesting in the things that they have to say about the process of reading and why they do it than writers talking about writing, which feels very self-flagellating sometimes. You know, I have friends, they're like, oh, I'm putting on my hair shirt today, I can't get any words down, I'm really trying to get the words down. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like I've heard that perspective already. Let me go hear about this person who's reading about, you know, this newly found book by Zora Neale Hurston. I really want to hear what they have to say before I get a chance to read that. And it's brilliant just to hear how people read books and what they do with it. Okay, so you also asked a question about legacy, and you know, hubris is a thing that I think a lot of writers have, but that I do not have. A very long time ago, I was reading an interview with Zadie Smith, and she talks about how few books have, you know, written hundreds of years ago have made it to contemporary times. And we like to think because we've heard of some of these books and we've heard of a few books by specific writers. You know, there's quite a few books by David Copperfield, by Charles Dickens that have survived. We've heard of a few books by Jane Austen. We've heard of books by the Bronte sisters. We've heard of almost the entire canon of William Shakespeare. Other people were writing and getting published. It's just that we don't remember those books anymore. Those books are lost to history. So I don't think my ego is there yet, where I would think, oh, in a couple hundred years, people are going to be reading Ibis. At this point, I'm just hoping I can get another book written and maybe get another book published. So in terms of legacy, it's not something I'm super concerned with. You have tremendous writers doing amazing things, writing about similar topics and subjects, and I love reading their perspective on it because I think that makes me a better writer. So I'd like my legacy, if there is one, to be, you know what, he became a better writer with each book that he wrote. He didn't just sort of stagnate. He didn't just sort of write one thing over and over again, which is an accusation against an author that I love and whose name I will not mention. But they're like, oh, he just writes the same book over and over again. So I just want my legacy to be, oh, he was a curious writer. And I think a lot of my curiosity comes from interacting with readers and interacting and hearing. And this is what I love about being an educator as well, getting to that other part of the question you were asking. You sit in a class with students and you hear their perspectives and they write things. And you don't want to say this too often because this will give them a kind of power that they shouldn't wield too much. But you're like, I would have never thought of that. And just to hear you mention it, it just kind of blows my mind to think that, you know, you were such a keen and curious reader to pick up on something. I've read this book 5 or 6 times and that completely escaped me. So I think as an educator, my legacy is always to be curious in the classroom. Don't be calcified in the knowledge that I've been given or the knowledge that I felt like I've picked up. Just to always be open to what people are thinking. And I think in that way, readers are similar to my students. And I think that's what connects them and what I love about both sides of that equation.
Yes, and thank you for that about teaching, which you just gave me a different perspective to prepare for the classroom. That is exactly why I love teaching, because I learn a new way of reading the text. One of my favorite stories, and I have one last question for you. One of my favorite moments in teaching. So I teach a lot of theater and dramatic literature, and August Wilson is an important writer of the canon. So for folks, if y'all have not seen The Piano Lesson on Netflix, please do. It's such an amazing movie. And of course, I read him in undergrad and graduate school, and then I had to teach him. And as a reader, it's just like, oh my God. Yes, this stuff is brilliant. However, I'm like, because this stuff is naturalist, it takes forever for things to really start because it happens in real time. And then the ways in which he writes women, I'm like, oh. And then just so much around masculinity. You should hear me when I first taught fences in 2016 to now. I went from, oh my God, I can't stomach Rose, to I, as an actor, would love to play Rose now because of the things that my students have said. So I've had 2 students from 2 different institutions. The first one, and this is where I went, okay, I get August Wilson now. And not only do I love teaching August Wilson now, I actually love reading his work now. I had a student, what was he, early 40s from Jamaica. And when I said, oh my God, I have to teach this book again. And he literally was like, after reading it, he said, I am Troy Maxson. I don't have a lot of Black men to read who look like me and who give me a perspective to really think about my own life, generational trauma, and my own father and how to be a father. And after that, I was like, you know what? Let me take a step back, reread Fences from that perspective. And I was like, oh my God, I love reading this book now. And then with Rose, I had a student who was in her 20s this past semester, and the character Rose is in her 40s. And this student was like, she was like, my mom is a Rose, I'm a Rose, because I believe she has children and she's married. And hearing the experience from her lens, I was like, oh, and then rereading Fences again, and I was like, okay, I get it. So seeing how students connect to the text based on their own lived experience, I'm like, wow, I love teaching August Wilson now. And for educators, this is why I say to my students, I'm a facilitator of learning and knowledge and a convener of of conversations. I'm not the expert. I've learned so much from my students in terms of how to teach literature and also ways to really frame conversations. So thank you for showing up in the classroom in the way that you do.
Can I just give you two quick anecdotes about being in the
Yes.
theater? So I love the theater, and my love of theater comes from my mom. My mom loves going to the theater. The only difference between us is she really loves musical theater, and I can do without music because I don't think people walk down the street and suddenly burst into song. But a long time ago, when they brought Fences back to Broadway, and this was Denzel and Viola were in the roles, I asked my mom, I said, hey, do you want to go see a show on Broadway? And I never want to influence her. I never want to say, we should go see this. I always want to go where she wants to go. So I give her the list of shows that are there, and I'm like, please pick Fences, please pick Fences, please pick Fences. And she says, you know what I'd love to see, which I haven't seen yet? I'd love to see South Pacific. And I'm like, oh!
What?
So I had to take my mom to go see South Pacific, and it was the last week of Fences, and I did not get to see Denzel and Viola, and they won Tonys for their performances, and it was heartbreaking for me. So that's one story. So the second story is I went. It was maybe the opening night of King Hedley II by August Wilson. And I had a professor friend. He's no longer with us, but he used to teach at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and I would visit him. He lives in He lived in Belchertown, so I would spend summers out there. And I know Chicopee, I know Belchertown, I know all these different sort of Western Mass places, Northampton, and he was like, oh, he's like, there's August Wilson a few rows ahead of us, and he said you should go say hello to him. And I said, I am not going to say hello to August Wilson, and I forget how much longer after that he was no longer with us. And I said, just go shake. You should have just gone and shake the man's hand and just said thank you for everything you've done, for everything you've written. And it was an opportunity that I still regret to this day having missed, just to go say hello to August Wilson. Thank you for what I've done. The last thing about being in the class and teaching Fences, I had remembered this and I had forgotten it because I've read the book so many times, but I had a student write me an essay about how the reason that Corey and Troy butt heads is because they're so similar to each other.
Yeah.
And he spent a long time talking about their names are exactly the same, but for one letter, that the letters are rearranged. And, Troy has the T in there. And he really goes into this really in-depth thing about names and Black names. And I was like, yeah, I just had a surface observation. Yes, Troy is Corey, but for one letter change and the letters rearranged. But he gave this sort of really brilliant sort of précis and kind of study of it. And I was like, I did not think of that until you told me. And thank you for that. I'll let you know. You were smarter than me on this topic, and I appreciate what you did with it. So, yeah.
I see again, and I've read Fences maybe 9 or 10 times. Totally didn't make that Totally did not make the connection about the similarity in the spelling of the names.
Right.
Which, speaking of Corey, I'm like, Corey, why? Which I still don't know because of how the play ends. But I'm like, I understand you and your dad had it out before he died, and he kicked you out. Why didn't you go to his funeral? I'm hoping he went to the funeral because the play kind of alludes to him not wanting to go. But yeah, wow. And I've had a lot of students make that connection in terms of why Troy and Corey are at odds is because they're so much alike.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So my last question for you, Justin, what is next for you and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
And this question, it's such a great question. I don't want I don't want Black writers to support me. I want to know how I can support you guys, because again, I feel like writers are seen to be separate from readers, And part of the reason why I wanted to talk about my writing and my books within my account of talking about books I read is because I don't want there to be that division. I feel like people see writers when they look at your brilliant podcast, or if they go to a reading at a bookstore or something, and access is always very kind of limited. You know, you get it online, someone signs your book, they ask you what's your name, and then they just sort of move you along. Mm-hmm. But if there are younger writers who are in the process of trying to write, I want to be a resource for them. I want them to sort of reach out and say on social media or just email me, just ask me questions. And sometimes I will see people's posts and I would just kind of DM them and just give them, you know, unsolicited information more so than advice. And I say, I hope I'm not crossing any boundaries. You know, I just have it's my first book is coming out, so I only know what I know, and I tell them, and they're also gracious and grateful for it. So Black Writers Read has supported me as much as they have already, and I am grateful. But let me know how I can continue to be part of the Black Writers Read community as another reader or as someone who, you know, wants to help people connect with writers more, is what I would say.
Nice. Thank you so much for that, Justin. This was so long overdue. Thank you so much for making the time to give us insight on your debut novel. For folks who are joining us, you can purchase Ibis wherever you get your books. It's coming out February 11th. Please be sure to pre-order. I'm excited to share the book with my students, and like we conversed over email. I really want to teach this book at some point because of just how rich it is. And I'm just imagining my students like loving this book and wanting to read more. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. This has been a pleasure.
Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, and next we'll touch base after I'm done with the live stream. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 14 of season 5 of Black Writers Read. I have a few more live broadcasts scheduled before taking a break in mid to late February. Yes, I am taking a break during Black History Month. I'm really excited about that. I have a couple of broadcasts scheduled for early February, and I'm taking the rest of the month off from this particular platform. I do have some things in the works, like I'm in the process of talking with a couple of organizations to collaborate on some in-person events. Also, I want to take my Black self and get back to working on my own writing, creative practice, and focus on teaching during the month of February. Support Black Writers Read by subscribing to my YouTube channel, where many of you are joining us from today, or the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Also, feel free to drop a review of Black Writers Read on one of these platforms. By supporting me as a subscriber or reviewer, you're helping me to grow the community, which can lead to longer-term sustainability for the platform. Visit Black Writers Read to learn, visit blackwritersread.com to learn more about the podcast. I will be back within the next week or so with our next live broadcast. Please be sure to find me on social media, blackwritersread.com. Black Writers Read, to learn about our upcoming guest. So thank you to all for joining me this afternoon, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. I will see you soon.